So first of all, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for coming along to this, which is the fourth, is it the fourth Co-operative Women's Voices conversation? It was lovely to see so many familiar faces, and also a big welcome to lots of new faces this week as well, which is brilliant. If you don't know me, my name is Rebecca Harvey. I'm Executive Editor of Co-operative News, and with me is Sarah Aldred, who's International Programmes Manager of the Co-operative College. So if you don't know, Co-op News is a magazine about and for the cooperative community around the world, and the Co-op College is the educational arm of the whole Co-op movement. For those of you who are new to these sessions, Co-op Women's Voices is a series of conversations that Sarah and I have been hosting since around December. It grew out of the Cooperative Women's Challenge, which was launched about 10 years ago, to empower women in the co-op movement, looking at things like how women can support each other, how can we build confidence, and how can we ensure a healthy work-life balance. So I've already done a few bits of housekeeping, but I know a few other people have arrived since. So first of all, this session will be recorded and will be made available on YouTube shortly. And also, please do keep yourself muted, and that would be really, really helpful, just so the sound doesn't bleed through. Please also do use the chat box to say hello to each other and to ask questions as well. I'll be keeping an eye on questions throughout the session, and there'll be also some time at the end for an additional Q&A. So today our guest is none other than Helen Wiseman, who is president of Midcounties Co-operative, which is one of the largest independent retail societies in the UK. And I'll leave Helen and anyone else from Central England to argue about which ones actually. Having said that, Sarah and I were actually joking before that Helen Wiseman should actually really change her name to Helen Wisewoman for this section, which I'm sure you've heard a million times before. But anyway,
yeah.
We've done the whole family thing. There's 4 of us, not 3, you know.
Oh. Helen was born in Hull, and she was worked for Midcounties for many years before joining the board. She's a self-confessed joiner, joining groups, joining people together, and I'm delighted that she's here today to share her story with us. So thank you so much, Helen. And I'll hand over to Sarah now.
Thanks, Bex. And just want to say it's an absolute delight. Me and Bex had a pre-brief with Helen last week, which was a total joy. So we get to talk to her all over again today. And so just another call out for people to put themselves on mute, because if we just hear a bit of background noise, really. So if you could just put yourself on mute, and we'll come to questions. So Bex is going to field the questions. So, okay, Helen. So we have, how we're going to start the session is Helen's joyfully shared some pictures with us. And what we're going to do is start Helen on her journey, because the purpose of these discussions really is just to get to understand the woman behind the cooperative. So, you know, Bex, could you start sharing some photos really? Because and behind these photos, we want to understand and pull out from Helen things like, you know, what's shaped Helen on her journey, who are some really inspirational people who've shaped her life. So Helen, do you want to talk to these pictures?
Yeah, the picture on the right as you're looking is probably the only picture I've got of my mum, myself and my 2 sisters. I'm wearing the jaunty red cardigan. It was funny when I was trawling through the pictures to realise how few there were of the 4 of us together. And in the top left there's myself and my 2 sisters on a memory walk that we did a couple of years ago, as we lost my dad sadly to dementia. And the bottom picture is the joyful picture is my very tall son on his wedding day to the beautiful Becca, and the lovely bridesmaids on the right is my daughter Louise and her partner Ben. So these are sort of the closest women in my family, and people, you know, sort of both past, present and future.
So
so these are lovely women here. The top picture is my namesake. It's my Auntie Rita on the left as you're looking, who is my dad's younger sister. She was many years younger than my dad. And on the right is my stepmom Sheila, who's been an important part of my life. Actually, I've known her all my life, but she's been a significant part of my life since my early 20s. On the bottom right is my mother-in-law, who was my mother-in-law longer than I had my own mother, as my mum unfortunately passed away when I was 25. And we lost Leslie last year in the summer very suddenly. but you know, from the age of 18 when I met her, she'd obviously been a significant influence, and she was the kindest woman you'd ever like to meet. The group on the left are my aunties at the back, but the lady in cream in the middle is my grandma, and she's surrounded by these are a bunch of Leeds people from Leeds. These are my grandma was one of 12, mainly I knew my great aunties rather than any of my great uncles, as most of them had sort of passed away. But the great aunties, with the exception of grandma, all lived in back-to-back houses in Leeds and were a constant source of family joy. And I think this would be at my elder sister's wedding, but thankfully most of them made it to my wedding as well, and they were such a lovely group of people. But you know, sort of these are the women I suppose in my family who've shaped my life.
Nothing wrong with women from Leeds.
Not at all. They were a wonderful group, and they brought such joy to every occasion, as you can see from the happy smiles there.
I'm going to say they look, yeah, everyone just looks really happy.
Yeah.
Talking of joyful occasions, this next picture is one of my favourites, and thank you, Helen, for letting us share these ones.
No, you're welcome.
Oh, this is fantastic. This is
okay. So, no, this isn't me getting married or as a bridesmaid. Okay, one of my many, as a child, we went to church on a regular basis. I'd like, as I explained to Bex and Sarah, my dad played golf on a Sunday morning, and my mum wanted us out of the house. So we sent along to Sunday school regularly. And in the very centre of the top picture, behind the boy wearing the pink with yes, that's me, with my hair tucked behind my ears, and if you don't recognise it, very similar haircut. But this was me in a retinue as a May Queen, and how traditional was this for our, I think it might have been a Presbyterian church at this point, but or it might have been United Reformed. It changed at some point along the middle. And at the bottom, as a result of being a Sunday school teacher, at one point I was invited to be May Queen, and there was me as a May Queen. and I use this not one to show the awful taste in colours in the 1970s, but two, it was an important part of our life that every May, and all of my family were involved. I think my sisters have all been May Queens. We even dragged my brother onto stage one year. We took part in the May Festival. It was a wonderful opportunity for us to sing and dance and do really stupid things. And I have been many things during the course of the May Festival. I think Bex has probably got one of those to show somewhere. But it was just an important part of our lives. So the top is one May Festival. And this is me in the middle wearing the W. I was Tomsk, and we sang Wombling. So it was just to prove that my eco credentials were established at a young age. The bottom lot are not actually a group of people doing community service. It's my family joining us on the local community litter pick one year. In the Wiseman family tradition, we did turn it into a competition, and of course the girls won. It's actually our local litter pick again this weekend, so I'll be joining in quite happily. This was just to sort of, I guess, demonstrate, as I say, that many things that have evolved through my life. I think Bex mentioned that I've always said I was a self-condemned joiner, and as part of that, the Girl Guides played an awful part, not awful, a big part of my young life as well. And this was me leaving home for the first time on guide camp. I'm on the far left. The one pressing a nose to the picture on the far right is my sister, I'd like to say. The bottom left is my school netball team, and the bottom right is my hockey team that I played for locally for a number of years.
The president of Midcounties Co-op or something. And I'm watching it because Abby's been invited to do one of these.
Okay, so
in the future.
Yeah, soon.
Can we just ask for people to put themselves on mute so we can just hear a conversation? Thank you. Thanks. Go ahead, Helen.
Yeah, it's fine. And this is these are the women, I suppose, who sustain me now. We've let some men on there. And these are sort of the friends who have helped me on my life journey in the last few years. At the bottom left, we've got as I'm looking at it, we've got my daughter and her godmother. The middle group are my friends of 37 years who I was at university with. We're still in touch with regularly. We meet up, and this was actually us meeting up in Bourton-on-the-Water in beginning of March last year when we last saw each other. But obviously we've become familiar with Zoom, and we now have a plan to meet up again this year. So these, we've grown up together. We met as 18-year-olds at university, and it's been a wonderful experience and joy to have them in my life all this time. At the bottom right, two close friends. One of the ladies there has been I've known since before I moved to where I currently live, and she actually provided childcare for me, and is a neighbour and a friend, and has supported me through thick and thin. And my social club at the top, the joy of many times spent, but also how they supported me through the good and the bad times. So I've been very fortunate to have some wonderful friends. So,
Thanks, Helen. And I think, one of the purposes of these discussions again is just to kind of just see the people who've shaped you. And I just think, just showing that through images and pictures of that is just a really rich way of doing that. And also just to point out, because I know in the pre-brief we talked about the role of men as well. It's not just, yes, it's co-operative women's voices, but it's not exclusive to men. and you were saying in our pre-brief, that actually, there's been very significant men in the background as well. So, going on from there then, so that's been a really gorgeous picture of your background. But in terms of moving into, so around the cooperative movement, what was it that led you on the path to the cooperative movement and being involved with co-ops?
The journey started, I guess, purely through chance, absolute chance. I was looking for a job in personnel, as we used to call it, and I spotted this job in Oxford and Swindon. That was under when Oxford and Swindon was the chief executive of Bob Burton. This is back in 1989, and I came along and I applied for the job, and it was my first proper job in personnel, in the sense of straightforward personnel as opposed to training. But I'd been doing my qualifications, professional qualifications, and I really wanted to put that into practice. I suppose it was quite interesting. I came along and got the job, and obviously the conversations in the interview would have been a lot around understanding sort of the personnel side of it. But and I recall there would have been talk about we're a different sort of organisation, but it was a long time ago, and I don't sort of really remember the emphasis that we would place now. And probably the clarity that we place now around what a co-op is and the difference it makes. And I remember ringing my dad and saying, "Oh, I've got a job, Dad," and "Oh, really good, congratulations. What is it?" "Oh, it's working, personnel officer for the co-op." And his reaction was slightly negative, I think it's fair to say. And this is going back to the co-ops of the late 80s. But also because his perception was driven from Hull, and in Hull we didn't really have any co-ops. The centrepiece of cooperation in Hull was the Three Ships mural, which I know has been on the Co-op News front cover, which stood above the old Co-op building. But by the time I remember co-ops in Hull, this was just a sort of market emporium type building, and we eventually saw the co-op CRS Leos come into Hull, but cooperation, didn't really exist there. And our only other experience would have been through co-op funerals, which, buried my grandparents in Leeds. So he was slightly negative, I think it's fair to say. But over the years, I hopefully managed to change his mind on that one.
And so what was your journey into Midcounties Cooperative?
Well, obviously, we've had Oxford and Swindon, merged with Gloucester. Gloucester transferred its engagements into us in the early 1990s. And then during the course of that time, the question of did I want to join the board came up, and it came out of a conversation I had with my colleague at the time, Trish Poole, and we were at a cooperative personnel services conference up in Scotland, and just having a little walk one morning, and I've never really had a defined vision of my career, and Trish was saying, well, you know, what next, sort of thing. By this point I had 2 young children, and I wasn't really thinking about what next, so I'd gone back to work, having gone part-time, and I said, well, I don't really know, but I want to do something more. And she put the suggestion, you know, she said, have you ever thought about standing for the board? And my initial reaction was, no, don't be silly. And then I thought about it. I went away and thought about it and thought, actually, you know, this for me would be a way of really ensuring that I wanted to have a say in the board. I wanted to ensure that the member's voice and the colleague voice was heard. And so I took the plunge, and you know, was thankfully elected by the members, and then obviously subsequent to that have been sort of re-elected, and even post-merger with West Midlands when we became Midcounties. That's sort of, you know, how my journey to the board began, if you like, and has continued.
And what do you think, being on the board, so what do you think women offer in that board space, and also what has, stick to that one question first.
Okay. Well, I suppose when I first joined the board, there weren't many women on the board. Around the movement, there were groups of women, but they were, you know, the boards were predominantly men, and I think probably at the time on our board there may have been 2, possibly 3 women, and over the time that, you know, that's changed considerably, and I now say Midcounties board has 11 women out of 16, and you know, and I think that sends a message, and it was to women everywhere, I suppose, and certainly women within the movement. But I remember, but the people that I remember around at the time, and one of the first women I actually remember is on this call, she's Jenny de Villiers, and I remember meeting Jenny and I can't really remember, I think it was probably a regional board meeting or something of that ilk, and I remember Jenny well from that meeting, because it would probably be one of my first sort of public meetings, if you like, of a meeting of the cooperators. Would have been absolutely terrified. And Jenny was one of those women who made me feel welcome and valued, and I think that's something that women across the movement do. I've been really fortunate that I've been president of Midcounties, that the group of women on the board has grown, and I find that what we bring, I suppose, is a different perspective, and I think it's a compassion, and I'm not saying that men aren't compassionate, but I think it's a very people-centered compassion, but also to each other, and the support that we give to each other, and that's not just within the board, but it's within the movement. You know, as president, I've been very fortunate that I had Elaine Dean, Sally Chicken, and I've got Jane Avery, that there are women across the movement in, you know, we meet up, you know, we've got Tanya on here as well, lots of people who have supported me as president, and I remember getting messages of support and congratulations from other women in the movement when I became president, and I think that's been really, you know, very important. I think within our society, Midcounties, I've seen a significant change over that period as well. We now have 3 women on the executive. We've got a number of women in senior leadership positions. Our senior operational team has a lot of women leading their teams. And I mentioned this morning about going into the store, and I was talking to, I think the two ladies I was talking to who, one was store manager, one was another store manager from another store, been around the society sort of 17, 18 years. And I asked them the question, knowing I was coming today, sort of have they, have they seen the difference? And they both said absolutely massively the difference in, for them in terms of being confident now to push forward for positions. We've said, we've always been sort of felt that we could do it, but there was that fear of putting our head up the parapet, above the parapet, and now they feel that they're in an environment where women, can quite happily come forward and are supported by all of the colleagues. And that was really nice for me to hear, actually, and reinforce sort of the value of this sort of thing that we're having this afternoon.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about different forms of compassion, really, because I know we touched on that when we talked last week, really. So, and you also mentioned last week, there was two other women that you mentioned, which was Chris Harris, and also Jo White. So do you want to just make reference?
No, I mean, I suppose you're talking about who sort of my co-op role models, and I suppose being in the movement during this period, I couldn't possibly not mention Pauline Green, because obviously Pauline has been the woman who's sort of been out there for the movement. But for me, actually, one of the, going back a few years, I was on the board and I was at Congress, and I think I was seeing our male president stand up and get the Co-ops of the Year award or something. It was an award anyway, and Chris was sitting next to me and she said, so come on then, when are you going to be president? And at the time we hadn't had a female president, and I just said, no, I'm not ready. But she was, we sat and chatted, and she was so kind and so supportive, and actually it's because of those sort of words from Chris and from other people that made me realise that yes, I could, I would at one point want to stand as president. I had a female president before me who was very encouraging as well, Ruth Fitzjohn, and the support of people like that over the years has been instrumental in my journey. But I describe this as my co-op hero. My co-op hero is Jo White. I've known Joan for many years, and I know many of you will know her. And Jo just gets on with it, and she gets it, and she for me is somebody who as a cooperator, but she does it with such generosity of spirit, and I love meeting up with Jo and having the opportunity to catch up with her, not just about things cooperative but family. And our children used to do swimming lessons together, so we used to have a dedicated hour a week when the kids were splashing around in the pool below us, just chatting about the world, the universe and everything, and it was one of the highlights of my week.
Brilliant. Yeah, and we're going to try and get Jo at some point as part of this series, really. But
yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I also just want to go back a bit as well, actually, as part of, because you talk about these important women as well, and we did touch upon it with the photographs as well. But it was something I didn't know about you, Helen, was just about being a young carer as well, and how that's shaped everything. I mean, when we were talking last week, you were saying that shaped a lot of who you are. Do you want to maybe just touch on that slightly?
Yeah, it's in my mum had a stroke, a big stroke when I was 16. So I'd just done my O levels at school and was set for my A levels. And we were away on holiday in Spain, first ever family holiday abroad. Me, my mum and dad, and my other siblings were all older, doing their own thing. And she unfortunately had a massive stroke, which left her in a wheelchair. And the nature of the stroke dramatically altered her personality as well. It's sort of that sudden change. Life sort of was just going on in a pattern that, I had a plan. I actually originally, I think I said I wanted to be a barrister, but it was, I had a sort of a vague plan of what I wanted to do. And then going back into school in the sixth form, with life having changed quite dramatically, because all my siblings were out at work. Obviously, my dad needed to continue work to support the family. And I never thought of myself as a young carer, and it's a thing that's sort of a term that's come now. We recognise the needs of young carer, but for me, sort of, I'd go to school and then perhaps might get a call to say mum hadn't gone to physio, or that, you know, occupational health, or the carer hadn't turned up. So obviously off I'd trot again and go home. And it was, I mean, I think it's amazing now that we recognise the role of young carers in society, and how many there are. And it's one of the, for us in Midcounties, Gloucester Young Carers has been one of the charity partners that we worked with over the years. And I'm always amazed that of the strength of character with the young people, but I think recognising the support that they need is something that's, you know, is a great step forward for us as a society, that, you know, we have done that. And so that was sort of that change, I suppose, the course of many things, and not things that I regret, because, you know, I probably wouldn't have ended up in the co-op movement, or I may well not have ended up in the co-op movement, but actually it did sort of change the course of certainly the next few years of my life.
Yeah, and I just think it's really important that, there again, that's another reason why we're doing these conversations, is that, you know, people make assumptions about, you know, women in positions, you know, and actually, you know, there's all kinds of narratives and all kinds of stories behind the women that are very human and very common and very real. And I think when you were telling me last week, I was just really touched by that story, because you just make different assumptions, really. And I think, and there again, the people who have been behind you and who have supported you, you know, you assume, you know, that someone's just this perfectly formed product, but actually it's a result of, you know, the networks, the friendships, the support, you know. And I think it's just, you know, you paint a really rich picture of your experience there. So I just want to say thanks for that, really.
You're welcome.
Just want to touch also, because we one of the big questions we want to throw at you, because we've been through a global pandemic, you know, we've just been so what do you think, just in the present and moving forward, you know, some of the challenges we have, you know, and then we can take it from there. But
I think from I guess there's sort of the global challenges and the national challenges, and then there's the movement challenges, and all of them are very interrelated, I suppose. So, you know, the pandemic, I think, for women has really undone some of the progress that has been made, and I think I remember reading an article by the UN talking about how disproportionately, and I think Simel herself talked about this as well on the gender equality, that women have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic globally because of the nature of the work that they do. A lot of their work has dried up as a result of the global pandemic, that women are often in the front line in healthcare, that we have caring responsibilities that have increased over the course of the pandemic, whether it be for young or old. And, you know, and that to me suggests that we haven't, whilst we may have made progress, we hadn't made sustainable progress, that, you know, hasn't been undone by this small event in the world. And part of that is around, you know, we still need to make progress on education for young people, for young women. And, you know, we've seen the rise in society of violence against women as a result of the pandemic. And, you know, it's, I suppose I'd say the fact that we haven't managed to make this progress sustainable is, you know, and it set us back, is something that, you know, we're going to have to address and for the longer term. But I think the issues, you know, broader than that, broader than women, I think, are around, you know, the issues around education and healthcare. And I think nationally we've seen, you know, the rise in loneliness, particularly in young people, you know, and I think it's young people and old people, but I felt it, you know, I've been here at home with my family members at different times, but not having that network to sustain me, of being able to go in the first pandemic, being able to go for a walk with one of my closest friends and just talk, you know, those things have, you know, affected me. And yet we have people who've been living on their own throughout the course of the pandemic, who haven't been able to see the family. And as and young people, I know our young cooperators network at Midcounties, you know, have been highlighting, and we're talking about the issues that affect them. And for young people, it's around, it is around loneliness, it's about their career prospects, because a lot of them work in, you know, the gig economy, a lot of them work in hospitality, and the fears that they have for the future, you know, as the economy opens up, what jobs will exist. So you know, at the moment, it feels like there are so many issues that we need to address. And I think, you know, cooperatives are centrally placed to support so many of those issues.
Yeah, and that links really nicely with just more of the international work as well, because I know Midcounties there again. I mean, you're a member of the ICA, you know, you've got a lot of representation across the ICA bodies. You know, it's a really strong and confident presence internationally, which is fantastic. Yeah. So maybe just want to talk about that really, and also the role of women internationally in that space as well.
Well, I think it was a conscious decision by the Midcounties board when we did our Imagine Future, our blueprint, going back a few years. I can't remember when it was now, 6-7 years ago. And we, when we talked about our Imagine Future, we talk about as being part of a thriving global cooperative movement, where, you know, and being a leader and a role model. So it's quite natural, I suppose, for us to then to seek that individual membership of the ICA, because I think, you know, to make that bold statement, I think you need to ensure that, you know, you then deliver on it, you know, if that's part of what we say. And it sits alongside, you know, us being wanting to build a better, fairer world by building strong local communities, and defining communities is, and what's local is, you know, something we struggle with and continue to challenge ourselves on. But it's, you know, that sort of, that global aspect for Midcounties has been, you know, is there, it sits equally amongst all the other parts of our Imagine Future. And so the natural progression then was, well, to be a member of the ICA, but also to bring forward the support network to do that, which was, you know, part of the reason for appointing a chief values officer, and Pete Westall, and making sure that for, you know, that this is an element of what you deliver, you know, and you deliver on your promises, really. So, and for me, and I'm thinking the conversation we were having last week, I was saying about, it never ceases to amaze me the impact that cooperation has globally. I'm absolutely astonished when you look at the figures and the impact that it has on both the global economy, on people's lives, on people's job prospects, and how many people, you know, so globally. And I think it's something like 12% of the world's population of employment age is in a cooperative, and it's just, it amazes me that this is something we, you know, it's only the co-op movement that knows about it. We don't really tell anybody else. Maybe they're not interested, I don't know, but I do think it's such a shame that we don't, you know, we don't strengthen those cooperative international credentials more. And I think the, you know, for women in developing countries, it can be the difference between working, not working, starvation. And, you know, I think about, you know, the examples that we had before the ICA conference in Rwanda, where there were the examples of women there who've managed to, because of the, you know, their economy was obviously disintegrated during the Civil War, but also they lost, you know, such a large percentage of the male population, that for the women they had to go out and find a way of making a living, and and cooperation has provided that opportunity. And I think we don't necessarily see that in the same way in this country. We see it as very differently in the way that sort of cooperative work. But I think, you know, it still offers those opportunities for women. And I think, you know, when I look now at the development of platform co-ops and the way the co-op economy is growing, partly coming out of COVID as well, that there are tremendous opportunities that, you know, it offers women to do things that perhaps they wouldn't have the opportunity to do otherwise in other forms of, you know, economy.
And it touches on Smel's work, because I know we talked about that quite a lot actually when we interviewed Smel, really, and there's a constant thread throughout, really. And I think, because I know a lot of my background has been in co-op development, the Global South, and it's, you really see the impact and the value of, you know, just empowering women to gather and do it themselves, you know, and it's often, you know, as a result of something, but it also doesn't have to be, you know, it's a viable line of adoption. We touched on, I'm conscious because we're going to ask people to ask questions as well, but just one last one before we open it up. We did talk a bit, because the theme of the Congress is around co-op identity, and we had a good chat last week about, you know, co-op identity, and what do you think it is, Helen? And I'm not asking you to answer this.
So it's interesting, because really, obviously, the sort of the official co-op identity, when you read it, sort of what is a co-op identity, I look at that and I go a little bit sort of thing. It's you know, sort of about this, it uses words in there that sort of don't really it doesn't really give us the essence of what the co-op identity is. And I think one of the challenges, and I think this is a challenge we have throughout the movement, is and I suppose this is why the current definition of co-op identity tries to be sort of a little bit, I wouldn't say vague, but it doesn't touch on for me, on the heart of cooperation, because it doesn't really bring to life the values and the people. But then when I think about some of the challenges we sort of talk about in our boardroom, and we talk about, what does an average member look like? Well, there's no such thing. What does a cooperative board member look like? Again, there's no such thing. And I think that's the beauty of it, is you bring this diversity. And I almost think actually the current definition of co-op identity pushes aside that diversity that we want to bring into the movement. And, you know, as you say, co-op members come in every shape, size, and board directors come in every shape, size, and that's fantastic, because that gives us that diversity to reflect the communities that we serve. And I'd like to see that reflected in some way in our cooperative identity. So it doesn't really answer the question. I think it tells you what it isn't, rather than
which is sometimes a really good starting point. And no, but it's just good to, because this is just a big, because I've just been doing some thinking for some other work on, you know, thematics around Congress and identity, and it's big and amorphous, and what does it mean, and, you know, it's just raising those questions as well. But we kind of think we know, but do we put it down, kind of thing. So
and I think the work that that's been done towards ICA and December, I love the threads in that, and I think, you know, there's some really interesting work around sort of establishing that cooperative identity, and sort of like the way that it's been approached, I think, is a really good way of doing it.
Right, and also, just before I do again, there's another opportunity for me to ask yet another question before handing it over, but when we were tweeting about this last week, saying this is fantastic, Pete Westall responded in a tweet that said, Helen Wiseman is the epitome of cooperation. I've known that woman years, and she's the epitome of cooperation. So can you just decipher what Pete Westall actually meant?
Me?
Yes.
Pete Westall. I think, well, yeah, I think I'm going to have to throw that one over to Pete, because I might not answer it in the same way as him.
So Pete, go ahead.
Well, I thank you for everything you said, Helen, because it has been dramatically illuminating, I've got to say, and there's been some great answers, and it's probably why I call you the epitome of cooperation. Cooperation to me is about doing the right thing, fundamentally, and it's bringing people in, it's making people feel that they can achieve more than perhaps they thought they could, whether that's on a collective basis or on an individual basis. I will say you've got a load of people on here from Midcounties. In 30 odd years of knowing you, you have always done the right thing, regardless of whether it was the most difficult thing or whether it upset people or whatever. And that is the essence of cooperation. It's doing the right thing for all of us. If you can stick a check in the post afterwards, I'll be quite appreciative.
Well, thanks, Pete. Yeah, that does credibility. I suppose I go back to, and then this is where it links back really to my background in the sense of the being a joiner bit, because I've always thought that I love sport. I love any form of sport, but I love team sports and I love participating in team sports. And ultimately, although I'm really competitive, it's about, for me, it's about that team spirit, working together. My hockey team that I showed you there, we started with a group of 13-year-olds and a couple of old people like me sort of turning out on a hockey pitch who hadn't played at that point for 20 odd years. And we turned out week in, week out and got absolutely thrashed. And those young people now have gone off, they've long since gone off to university, etc., or done apprenticeships, they've left school, they've grown up, and I still meet them, we say hello, they'll probably still be part of the hockey club. But I think that for me, that's about the collective being far greater than the individual, has always been there. And that, I think, sort of when I talk about the movement, I think, and the women who support each other in the movement, and the way that boards work together. That's why I say there's no typical board director, because I think if we had typical board directors, we wouldn't have diverse boards. We wouldn't have boards that bring together all these different ideas, different thoughts, different different backgrounds and experience, but still with the same collective values and views. And that to me is the strength, I think.
Brilliant. Thanks, Helen. I do have one final question, which I'm going to leave to the end, and it's a consistent question that we ask everybody. But before I get to the last question, I'm going to open up. Bex, do you want to field any questions from the room?
Everyone's been very quiet. What I would say though is, why don't we use the hand signal? So if you go on reactions at the bottom and click raise hand if you've got a question to ask Helen. I know there's a couple of hands up already, but before we go to them, I've got one quick question. Just as you mentioned sport, Helen, I know you're a big Hull fan. What are your thoughts on the new Super League, and what does it mean for fans, specifically because there's big cooperative teams involved?
Terrible idea.
Like Barcelona.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's an awful idea. And I think for many reasons, but as a football fan, I think to have a group of teams who just play each other week in, week out, with no opportunity for the underdog. My own team, Hull City, eventually got into the Premiership, and I know that we'll have Derby fans and Nottingham fans and all sorts of fans and people who don't care about football on here. But actually, I think for a group of people to exclude, this is like us saying we want to form a Super League, but we won't bother asking our members, and we won't talk about it to our members, because the people who drive football clubs, who are the heart of football clubs, are the members and the fans. So I think that would be my analogy.
And Nick on the chat, Nikki says, agreed, football is the fans, the people. I completely agree, Nikki. Thank you. Tanya Noon, you have your hand up. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Hi, Ellen. Thanks for sharing some of your, inner self. It's not always that easy, is it? So thanks for sharing that. Totally agree with you regarding football. But my question is really around, as women on the call, perhaps some people have never had the issues around being taken seriously, but that's something that I've always been asked about, because I don't think I'm always taken seriously, and I wondered if you've got any advice or support of how that could be helped for women in particular, because I'm seen as being too direct and don't give enough compliments. So I just wondered if you've ever overcome those kind of issues.
Yes. It's interesting. One of the things we just briefly chatting about beforehand is about the comments that I've heard and had, which is around getting elected to the board, that well, if you're a woman and you're young, you're more likely to get on. And I think that saying that to somebody who has just been elected to the board of directors, undermining and not giving credibility to the experience and to the message they've given to the members, it was quite shameful sort of thing. And I think this is, when I was saying about, we were talking about I don't like the phrase strong women, particularly, because it seems to be implied that you're strong or you're weak. And we wouldn't use the same analogy necessarily to men. I think it's about the experience that you bring and the different skills that you bring, and the fact that that you say you're a director, you direct and don't give enough compliments. Well, everybody has their different styles, and would we measure a man in the same way? Probably not. So to me, the advice I would give is, I suppose it's very difficult and very easy to say, and I think this would be my advice, to be true to yourself. Do something the way. I think it's okay to listen to feedback, and it's okay to temper your style if your style is something that upset people, or and I think we can all learn and all improve, and we can get that feedback from each other. But I think the elements of trying to change yourself just because that matches society expectations is something I find really, really frustrating. And I've sort of probably something that maybe you and I can have a chat about offline and talk about, because obviously, we both have different experiences and different views, and I would love to do that, to have a conversation.
That's great. I think because you've got your, that personnel background as well, you've probably got a lot more to offer in that arena. But I think it's also for women how we can help each other, isn't it? If and like you say, give good constructive feedback and learn from it. But thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Tanya. And this actually talks to another question that Valerie's asked. She says that, from your current perspective, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self, or to any other women in the co-op movement today? I
suppose it is literally probably that, about do something you want to, not just because it's expected, and don't let others' expectations sort of either hold you back or force you into doing something that you don't want to. I think, one of the things, and one of the challenges I've sort of had to overcome, I suppose, is, and it's a challenge that's common for many women in work, is this sort of whole work-life balance. And so I went through a phase where I was a mum with young children. I worked for the society in a full-time job that I squashed into a part-time hours, and I then stood for the board of directors, and it reached a point where it was overwhelming. And I'll be perfectly honest and open. I reached a point where I questioned every day whether I was, what I was doing was, I didn't feel I was doing any of the bits of it well. And I probably was, but it's about how you challenge yourself and how you feel about yourself. And I really, really struggled at that point in my life. And in the end, sort of finding my way through it with the support from my boss at work. But I think probably most people then wouldn't have known, because at the time it wasn't something you ever said. You didn't feel comfortable saying, I'm not coping. What you said was, I told her I wasn't coping, and we hid it from everybody, and she protected me. But actually, now I would feel, and I would hope that people would feel, it's okay to say I'm not okay. And I think that's probably the advice that I would give to anybody, that it is okay at times to you know, it's okay not to feel that you're okay, and to talk to somebody and get some help and support.
It's very, very true. Thank you. It is okay not to be okay. I think that's something we all could do with remembering from time to time. Thank you, Helen. Just on the note on the chat, Elaine Dean takes you very seriously. You'll be happy to know, which is excellent. And Judith and Judith Feeney has a question again on the international work. She says, could you name one idea which you had hoped might have been developed over your time within the co-op movement? It might be a failure to bring the co-op model into national debate. Just to provide a leading question, what are your thoughts around that? What would you like to see done that hasn't been done yet?
I suppose it's the eternal, for me, it's the go on, I'm going to be, it's about it's not necessarily an idea, it's more about how as the movement we work together. And across the movement we have people with such creative ideas, and I'm not a creative, but we have people with some brilliant ideas, we have people with lots of knowledge, we have people with lots of experience, and I just wish as a movement sometimes we'd use those collectively. And I understand there are commercial problems, and you know, and we're not necessarily talking about commercial issues, but I just think if we could talk to each other more in generating those ideas, sometimes we'd and utilize those more effectively. I think we'd perhaps prevent some of the stumbling that we do sometimes, and you know, that's across the movement. Having said all of that, what I really like to see is the fact that we each do our own thing, what we do well, and we support each other in doing it. So at Central have, you know, some real fantastic focus on the things that are important to them. Midcounties have the things that are important to them. East of England do, Group do. And, you know, I still think it's important that we allow those to develop, because those are again about our regional communities. It's about the communities in which we live, and recognising that those are the issues that as an independent society we need to address. And so I think it's a balance, but I think there are some big issues that as a movement in the UK that we should talk about more from in the grassroots sort of thing.
Thanks, Helen. We're conscious of time as well, so we're coming to the last question, but I just want to say before I ask you this last question, I just want to say thank you for such a personal, reflective conversation, actually, and it's been really rich and deep. And we found over the interviews, you know, they've been very different types of conversations. So there again, thanks, Helen, for just you know, being open to kind of have this conversation with me and Bex.
Welcome.
We have one last question now, so which we ask all the women. If you were stranded on a desert island, what 3 items would you take with you to sustain you, other than Pete?
Yes. Yeah, might need to explain that one. So yes, yes, there've been some interesting conversations going on Twitter, is all I'm going to say around this particular topic. And I know that I did, when I spoke to Bex yesterday, I did sort of say I'm going to take a bit of a liberty, because you may have gathered that I like talking. I can talk for England, although actually I talk a lot with my hands as well. And somebody said once if I sat on my hands I'd be speechless. So for me, and I think lockdown and the last sort of year has shown, sorry, I'd have to take a person, but it's not you, Pete, sorry. So I thought about this and who would I take? And I would indeed take one of my closest friends, because we are, I wouldn't take my husband because I need him at home to try and sort out my rescue. I'd leave him to that, but also he doesn't listen to me anyway. So I've got my close friend Wendy. We went on a Thames Path challenge, which was a 50-kilometre walk. We walked together all day. I got in the car and I went, oh, I knew what I forgot to tell Wendy. So I don't think we'd ever run out of things to say. And that I think would be important for me, to have somebody there, a person there with me. Otherwise I would be turning into that one person who draws a picture of a face on a football and talking to that. So a person is not really an item, but
You've got two others. You've got one, we're going to allow it. So Wendy's on your island.
Yeah.
What are the two things?
The other thing, and those who know me all of these years will know that this is something it's very practical, but it's actually really important to sustain me, is a huge first aid kit, because I am the most accident prone person anybody's ever met. I am probably the only person in the history of the UK co-op movement who broke her ankle walking into a boardroom, and I fell over and broke my ankle and lay on the floor and the company secretary came out and said, "You're late." Well, yeah, whilst I'm waiting for the ambulance. So I think a first aid kit, because I think whilst I'm trying to, sort of prepare a fire and everything else with all the things on this desert island that I don't have, I'm definitely going to need that. But that's a very personal thing for me. And my final one is a family one. Nobody in my family has ever gone off on a camp or an adventure or a trip around the world without something that I slip into their bag as they leave. And I completely forgot about this, and I was talking to one of the family members and they said, "Well, I can't believe you're not taking this. You make us." And it's an emergency poncho. And we have
poncho.
No, seriously. The kids my daughter opened her bag on it a rally, and she went off with Rally International to Costa Rica and trekking through the jungle to build a school for an indigenous tribe. And she found her emergency poncho. And I actually think it would have lots of practical applications on a desert island. So I have to practice what I preach and take that.
That's wonderful. So we've got you. So you're taking Wendy. You've got your first aid kit and you've got your emergency poncho. I think I
might starve or die of thirst, but I've got them.
Well, you've got your husband at home getting you back, so you will get back as well. Yeah. So honestly, I just want to say, so we've kind of come to the end actually of this session. So I just want to give it there again a huge thank you to Helen. It's been an absolute joy. Me and Bex absolutely love doing these. And just to say, thank you for your time, thank you for your generosity. And just thank you to everybody actually who's taken the time, through the day to actually join us and engage and listen. So these are every month. So next month we've got it's Sonia Diaz, is that right, Bex? So come and join us for that conversation. But just for now, just big thank you to Helen.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody for listening. It's obviously a strange insight, and I think it is lovely when I joined in the others to hear from other women about sort of their stories and really what's made them who they are. And so I've really enjoyed. I've half enjoyed telling it.
No, it's been brilliant. Thank you so much, Helen. Even there's a lot of people saying thank you on the chat as well. A few people had to leave earlier, and Pete is obviously #devastated that you're not taking him on your holiday adventures, but never mind. So Helen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful, and thank you everybody for coming along.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.